Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. My guest on today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews is Soleen M., a woman whose family of origin was riddled with alcoholism, abuse, and fractured relationships. As a disenfranchised child, she started drinking at 11 and progressed rapidly into alcoholic abuse. That latent disease helped deprive Soleen of adult supervision and good decision-making. She married at 14 and had a baby at 16 by a man nearly twice her age. Her budding alcoholism put Soleen in trouble with the law. As a way out of jail, she agreed to inpatient treatment at the first of many rehabs. By the time she was 19, she was still in lots of trouble, all of it fueled by drinking and drug abuse. Fortunately, the AAC was planted while she was in the revolving door of 4 different rehabs. Facing utter ruin, Soleen finally found AA at the end of a long, dark tunnel of despair and surrendered to the program for good and all when she was 26. Her involvement in AA has only grown over the years, and she has helped countless women who could only be helped by her brand of experience and no-nonsense approach to the program, and continuous study of the Big Book. That she was able to survive a liquor-soaked adolescence and early adulthood to later working a strong AA program is yet another example of God's grace in a recovering alcoholic's life. Soleen's brutal story is tough to hear, but it will bolster every listener's gratitude for their own journey of sobriety story. So enjoy the next 65 minutes with my friend and AA sister, Soleen M.
I'm Soleen. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Soleen. Yeah, that's what I say in response. I'm so glad that you're able to do this today. We got a little bit discombobulated last time we tried to do a recording. My recording equipment got cut off when some workmen came into the room. So I'm glad we're able to do this over Zoom today. Not quite as intimate as actually being right across from somebody at a table, but Zoom's probably the next best thing. And I've probably done about 3/4 of my interviews over the last 3 years over Zoom. Did you go to a meeting today?
Yeah, I went to a meeting this morning at 10 a.m. We have a breakfast meeting at my home group once a month where we cook breakfast, potluck, and have a meeting.
Oh, that is so cool. Is that just women?
It's co-ed. Yeah, so everyone comes out. It's small and intimate.
Well, that's great. The small, intimate meetings sometimes are the best, aren't they?
That's what I think.
Well, you and I met at a very popular AA club here in Houston. I thought that you had a lot less time than you've actually got. Someone who's as young looking as you can't possibly have that many years, but you've been sober quite a while.
I've been sober for 21 years.
That's amazing. What's your sobriety date?
6/24/02.
What was going on the 22nd of June, 2002?
I had probably just got out of treatment for the 4th time after about a 6-year run of crashing and burning. I made my first meeting at 19. I think it was 96 or 97. And I didn't stay sober, but I made my first meeting.
Was that after going to your first treatment?
No, I had went to a meeting before. I knew that I was messing up, and I knew that I couldn't control it. And I was drinking every day, blackout drinking, trying to work as a student assistant at Lamar University. And then I lost my job, totaled 2 cars in a week, and ended up, right after that meeting, ended up in treatment for the first time.
Wow, so that little brief stint of AA didn't work so well at the time, huh?
Well, it didn't work because I didn't get a sponsor, and I didn't work any steps, and it just all felt very cold and distant.
So let me ask you something about your first time in treatment. When you went to AA, did you think AA would be enough, or did you sense that you might need to go to treatment in addition to going to AA?
I just really didn't think I had. It took me many years after reading the Big Book where it says, what type of alcoholic are you? And I think I came into AA 6 years after that. Mm-hmm. And then I had about 5 years after that, 5 years sober. And I was reading the Big Book with the sponsee. It said, there are 5 types of alcoholic, and there was a type that can't admit they can't take a drink. And that was me. I was a type of alcoholic, couldn't admit she couldn't take a drink. In some way, somehow, I was going to continue to drink. And I thought that was just the purpose of life, was to have fun and to drink and to black out. And I was a blackout drinker, probably from the beginning. Blackout drunk by the time I was 13. I was a daily blackout drunk by the time I was 19, and I went to that first meeting.
You started drinking when you were 13?
I had my first drink at 9 at my stepbrother's party. Had a little gray out, but I wasn't really able to get a hold of it very well. I really didn't think about it too much after that. But then when I was 13, some things in my family life changed, and my mother and stepfather divorced, and she was partying a lot. She had stepped into some freedom, some reckless freedom. Mm-hmm. And because no one was really paying attention and there was some booze around, I picked it up very easily. Became very adept alcoholic, drinking to blackout at age 13.
Did your mother know that you were doing that?
Yes.
What was her response?
Sometimes she would let us do it, and then sometimes she would try to rein me back in. So there was one time in middle school where I got called into the counselor's office, and he said, the girls in the PE class are saying that you were drinking and blacking out at nighttime, staying up all night. That's why you're having trouble in school. I remember I didn't want to dress up for the Halloween event at school, mm-hmm. and my mother really wanted me to do it. I didn't want to because I had already went too far and done too much. I couldn't relate to those kids in middle school. I just didn't want to go in there and face them and do all that stuff. And my mother was trying to talk me into it. She said, Soleen, I think you are living for your next beer and boyfriend. And I don't know what your future is going to be.
And you're just a kid at this point?
Yeah, I was 13.
What did you think when she said that to you?
I don't know what I was thinking. I was pretty numbed out. I mean, you got to know that the time she was with my stepfather was after a long successive drinking binge of hers. And then she got with, I lived with my grandmother. We were very poor. Then she came back into my life and picked me up when I was 9. And I lived with her until 13. And that's when their marriage dissolved. She had fought in a custody case to get my sisters back. And I was 9 and my younger sister was 7 when she came back, and the youngest one was 5. A lot of times when families are reunited, if a marriage isn't really solid, it can't handle a major change. And that's what happened. Nobody thought about what would happen after she won the girls back in this custody battle, very expensive custody battle. Well, I was already living with her, and she married my stepfather, immediately started fighting for them in the custody battle. Then when the girls came back, her marriage dissolved and she started drinking. So when she had that conversation with me, I didn't believe anything she said. And I had some justified reasons for not believing her. And so this balance about justification and self-responsibility always stood diametrically opposed. It was hard for me to get past the justified anger, to see my own part. And my own part is holding on to it. And sometimes we are victims of the past, but it doesn't matter, however cosmically unfair it is. It is the victim themselves that have to let go of it and say, it is true, it was wrong. However, I'm going to be just as drunk on my ass by midnight if I keep holding on to it.
When her behavior was like that, and you're 13 years old, and you're seeing her get into more and more addiction and alcoholism, what was your thinking about that? Did you realize she was an alcoholic at that point?
I think I just approached it with an alcoholic mind. I knew she was a partier. I wanted to party with her. Life had gotten real hard after the stepfather left. We lived without electricity for 3 months. And there were some other things. We had, welfare lines, government cheese. We went to eat at a soup kitchen one time. We had a little money when we were going to school and Girl Scouts and, kind of normal. Mm-hmm. They broke up. Then everything was hard and dark. And we went one summer, the summer after they broke up, to a soup kitchen. And then all the kids that I had been attending school with, they were there volunteering their time. And we were there eating. So that's another reason for the justified anger. So as far as being able to recognize, if she was alcoholic, all I knew is this drinking stuff was fun. And I didn't want to think about all that other stuff. I just knew that she had gotten a man to pay her bills, and I wanted a guy, a very high priority on my list, a drink and a boyfriend. She got that part right.
So she got that part right, and that was the pattern that you saw yourself following in the future as well, huh?
Yeah.
That's tough. So there must have been a lot of shame associated with going through the soup kitchen on the receiving line instead of being one of the people dishing out the food.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, we grew up real poor, and there were intervals when my mother would get married that main one went to my stepdad was probably about the best we had it. My father and my mother are 20 years apart in age. My biological father, I was born, she was 17, he was 37, which is super weird. So he was a seaman, and I met him when I was 5.
Mm-hmm.
Then my mother got with my stepfather, and they got together. And life was pretty good because my biological father would come around, and him and my stepfather got along pretty good. They were very civil, very respectful,
Mm-hmm.
very mature about it. And my mother was raising me. And then when the girls came back, nobody thought about how they could integrate these two families.
Mm-hmm.
So then that was around 13 when I started drinking. And whenever I drank, it was to black out. I didn't think about whether or not anybody was alcoholic. I didn't think about whether it was right or wrong. I didn't grieve the abandonment of my mother. I just wanted another drink pretty much. Sometimes I would settle down and get to a real emotion and, miss her or want more, but mainly it was just this reckless drive, even at 13, to get another drink, go to another party. I was just running. I was looking for it.
So you were hanging with a certain group of people at that time, or were you drinking by yourself?
Well, it was with my cousins, with my mother's friends' children, their children. And, but I drank a lot by myself, to tell you the truth.
What were you going after when you were drinking? Was it to numb out? Was it to become a different personality? Or how did you see yourself feeling if you took a drink? What was the desire to take a drink telling you?
Well, it was a break from all the things that I thought caused me to drink. I thought the poverty and the broken down family caused me to drink. I believed that years into my sobriety. But really, I think that this feeling of apartness, this feeling of shame from being poor, I think all of that would exist regardless of what environment I was born into. Because they have people that aren't born into those extreme poverty environments and they still are alcoholics. But I thought it was the external for a long time. But later, after I got sober and acquired some things, I still arrived back at the place of loneliness and suicide. That came back at me when I had 15 years. And I had gotten all the things. That was real confusing. I thought it was a drink. Then the drink was removed. And then I got time and I bought a house.
Yeah.
I paid it off. I bought a car. I had a job making pretty good money, decent living. And I had won all the things. And I still arrived back to the jumping off place.
Between 13 and 19, when you first went to AA and then went to treatment, what were those 6 years like for you?
So my mother, at the time I was 13, she dove off the deep end. And she actually tried to go back to one of her ex-husbands, my sister's father. And I went to stay with a man in my family. And that didn't work out. There was some abuse that went on. And so then I went back to stay with my mother. When I was the end of my 13th year, she had gotten and married this man from Mexico. They were from Mexico. They were undocumented workers. So then I still wouldn't go to school. And it was just too much. We had gone too far. I couldn't relate to those kids. And I just did not want to do it. So then my mother told me that I should marry this guy. It was my mother's husband's friend. He was 24. I was 14. So I got married so I wouldn't have to deal with the truancy officer. And that lasted 9 months.
So it was your mother that suggested that you get married at 14?
It was.
Wow. What did you think of that at the time?
I was all for it because I wanted to be like emancipated so I wouldn't have to deal with truancy officer, parents. I wanted to be a grown-up. I didn't really understand what it was, that the childhood I was giving up. But to tell you the truth, I probably couldn't have dealt with childhood anyway. I was already off to the races.
With the drinking, and were there drugs involved as well?
Yes. So I hadn't really got into the drugs yet. It wasn't long after that. It lasted, like I said, it lasted 9 months. Then me and my grandmother got into a house together and the party was on. I remember one night they had a bunch of people come over and we were all drinking, maybe like 30 people. And I was at the coffee table pouring shots and Southern Comfort. And my grandmother looked at me and she was really serious. She goes, "You're a serious drinker, aren't you?" I said, "You bet your sweet ass."
And you're 14 years old and you're saying that to your own grandmother?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Oh, it was very, it was not very unorthodox.
Sounds like you took some pride in that as well.
I just thought it was funny, I thought there was some pride in that, by being able to drink more, drink harder. And actually, there was a lot of, status in the family if you could drink and not have a hangover and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So you're married at 14. What were the next few years like?
Well, like I said, it only lasted 9 months before I left. And that's when the first opportunity I got out of there. And at the time, there were a bunch of little younger girls, and I mean girls, like 15, 17, because at the time, if your parent would sign, you could get married in Texas at 14, if your parent would sign. And this group of American women who were dating the men from Mexico, they were all damaged. They were about my mother's age. There was a little group of them. They were like a subculture of women from broke down families. And this relationship that they had, this circle that they had made with these men from Mexico, I believe the reason why they did that was because the guys had a certain family-oriented, because they had come from families in Mexico. This appealed to these damaged women. And but most of them, as it turned out, had wives back in Mexico. So me and the girls my age, we were the daughters of this group of women. So at the time, it was very common for a girl, say 17, to get married, or 16, and her mother to sign, and for the whole truancy officer problem. But they get married for papers, so they could get the Mexican man papers. It was over here. And not long ago, I still know one of the girls is my age. Me and her are like 2 months apart in age. She come to Houston. She stayed with me a few months. Now she's sober 6 years. But right when she came, we went to a meeting together. And I was telling a little bit of my story. And I said, tell you the truth, I didn't even know anybody that got married when I was coming up. I said, ain't that right, such and such? And she goes, unless it was for papers, bitch.
Yeah, so these men from Mexico, they were being set up by your mother and the parents of these other young girls, and they get to the U.S., they marry, your mother signs off the paperwork so you don't have to worry about truancy at school. And then once the papers come through for these Mexican men who have come to marry, do they split or do they stick around?
Everyone was different. The guy that I married, he really thought he loved me, but the truth was he was 24, I was 14. It's a pretty sick situation. However, He was not physically abusive, and they had a lot of that going on. My one friend, she got married to the guy. He paid her for the papers. He didn't want to have any further relations. And in her mind, she had never really had a family. They were married. This was her husband. She wanted to be with him. And so it was a case by case basis. Some guys that would get girlfriends, and then the girlfriend here would find out they were married in Mexico and approach them at this get together. They had the baseball every weekend. And I remember one scene where this guy just beat the hell out of one girl. I mean, she couldn't have been older than 25.
In front of everybody?
In front of everybody, yeah. I mean, he hit her about 5 times.
That's a shame.
Oh, it's very traumatic, when you see that in real life. I was never beat up like that. I believe, I don't know what was looking out for me, but it was something. My grandmother used to say that her father, the Pentecostal preacher, would pray for his children, his children's children, and all the ones to come after them.
Yeah, I can imagine that. That's a traumatic thing to have to go through. I'm sorry that you had to do that. Now, when you were 14 and you're married, did you have any kids?
No, I didn't have any children with him. I was ready to get out of there. I did. Then me and my grandmother got into an apartment. I got into a house, and because I was very much, my drinking was picking up. It was a party every night. And then one day, my cousin had a friend come over who was a Vietnamese guy. And when he walked in that door, I didn't recognize anything that reminded me of me. And I liked him. He drove a Nissan 240 XS, drove a nice car, was in college, had credit cards. He had all these things that no one ever had. He had a muffler for his car, which was a rare occurrence in my family. He had inspections, a license, and tags all at the same time.
He was pretty straightly strung, wasn't he?
Oh, man, he was the sickest one in the room. He was Al-Anon.
So is that what you were attracted to?
I wanted something different. You asked what was that I was looking for in the drink. Well, I was looking for that in the drink, and everything else was just an escape. I just wanted to run far and fast enough so I could get the furthest away. And so he became the father of my first child. I got pregnant at 15. I turned 16 in November. She was born in January. So I was 2 months into my 16th year when I had my first child. Yeah, I didn't drink when I was pregnant. He was with another girl, and then he came back around when I was 8 months pregnant, and we got together, and we had a lot of idealistic hope when she was born. We wanted to be good parents, and we tried. At 16 and 19, he was 19 and 20 around that time. We gave it a good shot, but see, just like there's one type of woman that's attracted to a guy from a big family. I come from a broke down family. So when I saw him and he had a very cohesive family, that was appealing to me. I wanted something that I saw in him. And so, but there's another part of that. The other counterpart are these guys that get with girls that come from broke down families. And I believe there's a reason for that. I believe the reason is so they can feel superior because they have some kind of inferiority going on in them. And so we were two ends of the spectrum coming together, both suffering the same feelings of inadequacy and inferiority, but for different reasons.
You don't have to, as the perpetrator there, you don't have to break down what's already been broken in the past, right?
Right.
They look for that sort of thing because that's what they would do, and they don't have to do it because it's already been done by your family of origin.
Right. So they can feel like, I think, the truth was that guy was only 19, 20, so I can't stay mad forever. But I think he wanted to be the hero. And we were just two damaged people, young kids trying to make it work. And we hurt each other a lot.
I can imagine how all of this stuff just kind of coalesces for a life that feels out of control. How did you feel at that point?
After the daughter was born, I was just so afraid of losing my ex because he was the most stability I had ever known. And really what I was suffering was childhood abandonment issues because neither one of my parents were capable of taking responsibility. They came from a damaged, right about the time the 60s came when, the marriages kind of dissolved in the country. And so I'm not really mad at them. They did the best they could. I know we say that a lot, but really they did what they were capable of. And I believe they did love me. And but the truth is the truth. And the truth is a lot of things happened. And it took a long time to find some feelings of calmness, to being calm and steady and secure. And the absolute fact is the only security, the only emotional, physical security, financial security that I've ever had, I've given myself. Yeah. I've tried to find the men. I've tried to find this guy and that guy, and it's never worked out. Now, as it turns out, the best provider of all these things that I've ever had has been a higher power helping me to develop my own qualities. And it's been the result of my own effort and not looking for someone else to do it for me.
That's a few years away now that solution is there for you. So you have the baby early in your 16th year. We're still about 3 years away from you going into treatment. What were those first 3 years like of the baby's life and of your life at that point?
My grandmother took care of my daughter. It was good and bad. She would take over. She wanted to interfere. I kind of let her do it because I went back to high school at the time. Mm-hmm. I went back to a regular high school. It was very football, very image. Cheerleaders were very beautiful. That lasted about 9 months. Yeah, well, that's about 6 months. And then I moved to back to Port Arthur, and that lasted about 3 months. And see, what was happening at the time was that one of my ways I tried to control my drinking was to get with a guy like my daughter's father who would try to be an authoritative figure, not let me drink. And it worked pretty good. It kind of reined me in a little bit. So after she was born, I would sneak around and drink. And then by the time I had tried the school thing and it wasn't working out, was diving off then into pot, cocaine, tabs, acid. It was off to the races. I was about 17 or 18 at this point. And me and my grandmother and my daughter, and sometimes my mother, sometimes my aunt, we all lived in the same house in Port Arthur. Mm-hmm. The party was on. And so me and my cousins would get together. We'd go to concerts. We'd have house parties. We were drinking and using drugs every day, and I just stopped going to school. Then I got my GED and enrolled in college, and I had a 4.0, and I was trying to get away from my grandmother at the time because she's kind of abusive. And me and my daughter took off and we moved to Port Arthur. It was at that time when I was living in Port Arthur that I went to my first meeting at 19.
You saw your life spiraling out of control at that point. Were you really cognizant of it, or were you too messed up to even notice it?
I knew that I had gotten a little piece of a life by going to college and getting my life set on a course where maybe I could, succeed at something or have a little piece of a life, something worthwhile. But I knew that my drinking was really, like I said, at that point, I was a blackout drunk every night. And so I went to a meeting with a woman named Dina. And she took me to my first meeting, bought me a book. The women stayed after and shared with me. And it just I thought they were old and everything felt cold and distant. It just wasn't for me. I couldn't relate.
Looking back, Soleen, do you think had that particular night or whenever it was that you went to that meeting, if the women had treated you different than it sounds like they did, that it might have made a bigger impact on you with regard to getting sober in AA?
Here's the thing. They were treating me great. I could not hear them. It felt cold and distant because I was only used to reckless, running. And these were calm people. They were treating me good. The words they were saying were not the words I was hearing. All I knew was fight, 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 and competition. And, are you going to try to take my boyfriend? Don't blink. Well, anyhow, Dina gave me a ride home. And she said, so what do you think? Did you have a good time? And I told her, well, no, I really didn't. And she goes, why not? I said, because those women are jealous of me. And she was this little sawed-off Black woman. She was about my height, 4'11". And she got right in my face. We're in the car, and she goes, Soleen, no, they are not. They are not jealous of you. No, they are not. They're not. I tell you what, I was so crazy, so far from anything getting through. But one alcoholic talks to another, that got through. I thought, maybe she's on something. Maybe she's right. They're not jealous.
So that's right after your first meeting, huh?
And good for her and good for me.
Did you go to another meeting after that? How many meetings did you end up going to?
Well, I had a really bad night one night, and then I ended up busting into a meeting, the old Port Arthur group, and the meeting had already started. And I went inside and sat on the couch and listened. And I thought that I was just I read the part in the book in the preface in the forward of the third edition. At the time, it was a third edition book. And it said, there are some people, some percentage, 50% got sober immediately, 25% after a while, and of the remaining, they showed significant improvement. And I thought, I'm going to be that 50%. I'm going to be the ones that get sober immediately because I just got a little light dose of this alcoholism thing.
Sure you did.
Yeah. And in about a month, I wrecked 2 cars, and I had this wild blowout binge. And I wrecked 2 cars in a week, totaled mine and my boyfriend's car, and ended up my first trip to treatment.
Now, when you took that drink that led to those crashes and you relapsing, how long had you been continuously sober in AA before that happened? And what were you telling yourself when you went out?
Well, the 2 meetings that I made, I never got any. Well, I think I tried to white knuckle a month, and I was drinking, like, I'm serious, a pot of coffee in the morning. But I think I don't even know. I think I got maybe a month, but still with like some sleeping pills and stuff in between. But I really wasn't trying. I just really didn't want to have to put in the effort. And then the second time I went to a meeting, I was probably drunk that night. I really can't remember. But there was no coming in, getting a chip, calling a sponsor, going to meeting every day. There wasn't none of that. I would just like to drink. I drink for the effect.
Yeah.
I've always been extremism. So there was no thinking about. I don't remember a lot of that. Yeah. I just remember I really didn't want you guys had, thank you very much. I just didn't want to self-destruct. And I knew that was coming.
It sounds like the minefield had been set with you in the middle of it. So no matter which way you go, if alcohol or drugs is involved, you're finished. Going into, was it an inpatient program that you went into?
It was a state-funded inpatient, 9 to 18 months.
Wow. What was that like?
I know it was a long time back then. And they said, you can't read anything that's not recovery related material. I tried to read the big book. Now I love the big book.
Yeah.
But at the time, I could not relate to Bill's story. Then I went to an outside meeting, and this woman who I adored, she got through. She had 7 years. Her name was Val. When she spoke, it was just so beautiful. And she said, actually, I was in treatment back to back twice.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Houston with little Soleen's father. And I came back and I met a guy and I had another child. And I got pregnant, had my second son. A couple of years goes by. Then I was 24. And I'm sorry, 23. I had my second son. And at 24, I got 2 drug felonies for bad prescriptions. Mm. And then I ended up going to treatment the last 2 times. It was the third time I got to treatment. There was a woman there. I was in jail, actually. And they came and got me in jail. And they said, you're getting to leave. But I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if I thought that I was going to safety. I forgot to tell you this part. I was in jail 3 days and I could feel fetal movement. So I already got 2 kids. And I was running and gunning and drinking and drugging and doing all sorts of illicit drugs. And I got to jail and I could feel fetal movement. It took me 3 days to get to the infirmary. Sure enough, you're pregnant. But, it's good news because they gave pregnant girls special treatment. You got to have 2 milks and you got to take a nap whenever you wanted. That was a big deal in jail. So breakfast was 3:45 a.m., lunch was 11:45 a.m., and then dinner was at 3 or 4 p.m. We didn't have commissary. You didn't eat after 4 p.m. And my grandmother would send me $25 a week out of her disability check. And I would look around the dorm and they had like 40 other women. And I just lost my house, my car, my job. CPS came in before I went to jail and took the kids and put them with the grandparents, the ex's grandparents. Mm-hmm. And I had lost everything. And the only thing I could think of whenever I looked around this dorm, because my grandmother would send me the check, and denial is a powerful thing, I just thought I had it going on. I mean, look, I was still managing pretty well, right? I had more commissary than the girl on the bunk next to me. I mean, I can manage. This isn't so bad. I can manage this. I had one last diehard enabler, and her support was just enough to fuel the delusion that I was still in control. So they showed up one day. My probation officer shows up and she says, have you been cutting? Because I was doing some of that too. And I said, no. And she said, I want to see. And I went and talked to her. So she left. She comes back. 4 months went by. I was 4 months pregnant when I got there. She came back. I was 8 months pregnant. And by that point, I was ready to talk to her. And I said, do whatever you can do for me. She said, okay, I'm going to try. About a week later, I'm sitting at the spade table. I couldn't go to SafeP. They had sentenced me there. But if you're more than 5 months pregnant, you don't get to go. So all the time I was spending in jail didn't count. So anyway, I go get in the van and they bring me to Franklin North. I'd already been there twice. And they did all the same stuff.
These are state-funded rehab centers.
Treatment centers.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And well, anyway, they bring me in the van from the jailhouse to the treatment center. And my first meal was a tuna fish sandwich. Oh, wonderful. Let me tell you, I'd never had a sandwich that good. The next day, they said, okay, you don't have no clothes. We're going to take you down to this place where you're going to get 2. I got there. And they said, okay, go in there to this room of donated clothes and pick out 2 pair of pants and a pair of shoes and 2 shirts. And then they took us to an outside meeting. And I asked this woman to sponsor me. And she said, okay, I want you to go read the big book, read the doctor's opinion, and I want you to write me a paper on it. So I had been to college, I'd had like 2 English classes. So that made me a literary critic, right?
Mm-hmm, sure.
So I read doctor's opinion. I wrote a complete synopsis on the doctor, his competency to write the opinion. And I went back and it was like a critical review. And I presented it to this woman that had 7 years. What I didn't know is that she already had her master's degree and she was in college to get her doctor's degree. and she said, girl, you done wrote everything about the doctor and nothing about yourself. She said, I want you to go home. And the doctor's opinion is a description of the alcoholic. And I want you to read that, find yourself, and let me know what type of alcoholic you are. So it was still 6 years later, after I got sober, that I finally understood which one I was. See, I thought I was all of them. That first time in treatment, I only stayed first time 3 days, second time 2 weeks. left and got pregnant again and had another kid. And then when I went back, on that third time was the first time I ever heard anything. And I wanted to try this AA thing. And when I got out, I had 8 months, got out, I wanted to, just walk off into the sunset and have this great, illustrious, sober life.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. You must have been doing pretty good during that time to be let out at 8 months. What were you doing that got them to cut that down for you?
What I was doing is that the treatment center director told me I should not be in a relationship, and I was maintaining a relationship. And the person wrote me a letter. She saw it come through, and she came and told me, "Look, I see this letter. It's from your boyfriend, and I don't think you're being honest, and I don't think we can help you anymore. So we're going to let you out." So I got a get out of jail free pass, but because they were discharging me, it didn't revoke my probation. So I got out. I had 8 months.
You got kicked out.
Yeah, I got
kicked out.
We didn't call it that, but they told me you're no longer
Get
welcome
out of
here.
here. Right, I get it.
Yeah, it was like an honorable discharge or
Okay,
whatever. It was
I get it.
Either way, I had to leave, but they wasn't going to revoke my probation, which was very nice.
Mm-hmm.
But really, they didn't need to, because left it to my own devices, I was drunk again in a month. I went to Cassoulet. I strongly suggest if anyone's going to relapse, don't do it with a watered down margarita at Cassoulet. By the next Monday, I had already caught another case. I had been in a blackout all weekend, and I was going back to treatment. And in case anyone doesn't know it, there's this little manipulative trick you can play with your probation officer. If you get another case, you can run into treatment and call them from the treatment center, and most times they won't put you in jail. Huh. And I told her, "I'm back in treatment. I'm doing good. See, I had a relapse. Now I'm back. I want to do the sober thing, get myself on track." She said, "Okay, you can stay." I stayed again. I finished 3 months. I got out, relapsed again. I met that same woman that was at that first meeting when I was 19. I didn't recognize her. She told me she would sponsor me. She called me and said, "How have you been doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm looking for a job. Everything's going great." She said, "Well, you're not going to be able to keep that job if you don't stay sober." Uh-huh. Then I was drinking very alcoholically, but I had met a girl who had 4 years sober. And I called her, and she said, "Go to a meeting with me." I only had like a day or so sober. I told her I need a sponsor, because if I get caught again, I'm going to go to jail for a long time. And I said, "I'm going to call Donna and ask her to sponsor me and tell her I've been making meetings, I've been reading the book." And then my friend for 4 years said, "Why don't you take the manipulation out of it? Just call the woman and ask her to take you through the steps." And I followed those specific instructions. I called Donna, and she said, "Yes, make a meeting every day." At this point, I was 25. And all the stuff I just told you was the 6 years in between 19 and 25.
So how many babies in total did you have during that 6-year period?
I'd had one before I was 19 to 16. I had two in between 19 and 25.
And what happened to those children when you were in treatment and incarcerated?
So before I went to jail, and I was drinking and drugging, and I did some cutting, and CPS came in. They saw those cuts, and they took the babies and they put them with my ex's father's mother. And then later, my daughter's father came and got her. Huh. When I was in jail, my middle son was with his grandmother, and then back with his father later. And then my daughter was with her father.
You've got a whirlwind of a story. I'm doing all I can to try and follow it, because it goes off in so many different directions at the same time, because it sounds like your life was like derailing every 6 months or every year. But by the time you're 25, you finally hit AA. with a desire to stay, or were you still resistant?
I wanted to stay. The first sponsor told me make a meeting every day. I didn't want to do it, but I started doing it. I had about 2 weeks sober, and I was all numbed out. I had a drinking dream. I woke up and went to the kitchen and got something to drink, and I sat down, and I didn't even see it coming. I was real numb, and then I had a drinking dream, and I just started bawling, because I thought it was real.
Yeah.
And I realized for the first time I wanted something else. I wanted not to drink and destruct and end up going to prison, state jail.
Wow.
I had about 2 weeks sober.
Okay, so that's your sobriety date?
6/24 of 02.
June of 02, you finally get to AA with a desire to stay sober. What were you doing differently when you got back to AA for good?
The first sponsor told me make a meeting every day, and I started doing that. She said, you didn't drink part-time, you can't recover part-time. I know that it isn't said a lot anymore, but it made a lot of sense. I told her I don't have a job or a car or a phone or any way to get to a meeting. She said, I'm pretty sure that you didn't have those things when you were drinking, and you still found a way to get a drink. And I want you to use that alcoholic resourcefulness to get to a meeting every day. And if you use the same resourcefulness to get to a meeting that you used to chase a drink, you're not going to have no trouble staying sober. And I understood that. I understood extremism. I understood take it to blackout. Get there or die trying.
Yeah.
That's the way I drank.
Sounds like she understood you like through and through. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment. Yeah. She's still around.
Is she really?
Yeah. When I first got sober, I had no skills. She was very patient. I was really crazy. I couldn't pay attention to what I tried to listen to her and couldn't hear her. I knew she meant well, but I just couldn't hear her. When I had 2 years, I moved to Houston because I met another guy in AA, and I had 2 years and 4 months, and he had something like 14 months. He had 14 months. I met an old-timer woman. She had 24 years when I met her. That my first sponsor was, her family was sick, and she was in South Carolina. And so this new woman I'd met told me to be at her house, and we were going to go over some things. And I went in there, and I talked for about 40 minutes without her getting a word in about all this illustrious, great life I'd been having, in AA. I said, what step do you think I'm on? 10? And she goes, 2. She said, you've given God the drink problem, but no other problems. And she goes, who do you owe the money to? And I told her, well, you see, I had some wreckage of sobriety at that point. I owed my dad some money, and I owed this girl that I'd stayed with some money. She said, I want you to write amends letters to your father, to this girl, and you be at my house on Sunday to go over the letters. Because the thing was, I hadn't done a lot of amends, and I just had some more work to do. I was doing the best I could, but I really needed to get down to some more causes and conditions.
Had you done your 4th and 5th step by that point?
I did my first 4th step with my first sponsor. My first 4th step was 2 spirals thick. I thought that I was just going to do it a lot and extreme, and I was going to get 20 years in about 3 months. Well, the 5th step took 2 weekends because I was real arrogant. I had people on there from kindergarten, and
yeah, sure.
I was just thinking about myself.
Yeah.
And then I didn't understand 6 and 7, one paragraph each in the book. I was told not to do any book except the 12 and 12. Except the big book. But I did go to the 12 and 12 and read 6 and 7, and I didn't understand the damn thing it said. Then when I did an 8-step list, I had some amends gone wrong. I had couple of them go good, but I really wasn't willing to make no financial amends because I wasn't making very much money, and money was always a scary thing to me, being able to support myself.
Now, when you say that you had amends that went wrong, are you talking about amends that you tried to make and you got kicked out, or the person reacted to you negatively? What are you referring to when you say that the amends went wrong?
What I mean is I was so selfish, I could not conceive of the concept of making a change. I thought the amends was an opportunity for me to get to go explain myself to everyone and to manipulate them into believing that I wasn't a bad person, to people please so that they would like me. I thought it was an opportunity for me to go manage more of my way. I just didn't understand.
What part of the big book does that come from?
Oh yeah, it's not in the big book. That was in Soleen's head. Actually, when you look up amends, it says restitution for harm done. It's that word's in the book.
Right.
When you look up apology, which is what I was doing. I apologized and asking them to believe me. When you look at apology, it says a statement of wrongdoing. So a statement of wrongdoing is a words. An amends, restitution for harm done, that's an action.
Right.
So when I went to Callie's table with the two amends letters, and she took out a red pen, started cutting stuff out, said, we're not going to do no explaining. This isn't about you. We're going to take the ego out of this. She had just had me look up those two words. She said, we're going to get into the action. And the action is, you're about to pay these people back. And so because I could not conceive of making amends in spirit, or the purity of making an amends, I could understand pay the money back. And so paying the money back got that energy flowing so that later I had 16 years before I finally understood the freedom in amends, that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they do, what they did. All that matters is that I make my part right, and then I'm free. The amends is for me. It took a long time.
When did you notice some healing going on in those relationships?
After I got sober, and I had 2 years, and I moved to Houston, I learned to pay the money back. Mm-hmm. And then my sponsor told me I had to go to school. So what I did between the time 2 years sober and 15 years sober was fight. I took they say that God will remove the defects that stand in the way of their usefulness to you and my fellows. Mm. I believe God let me keep the extremism. I thought that I was going to go to school and get the ability to make some money and get skinny and drive a nice car and go into meetings and show off, and everyone would think I was so cool and wonderful. That's not what happened. What happened was I was able to get a little stability so that whenever I had 16 years, my father came back to live with me and stayed here 5 years. Mm-hmm. My daughter came to live with me for 4 years. We made some real progress. Mm-hmm. And then my mother came to stay for a couple of years, mm-hmm. A couple of years altogether, but different times. When I was 15 years sober, I had won all the things. I was married from the time we were together when I was 2 years sober. We got married when I was 7 years sober. When I was 9 years sober, we walked out. And we had been the darlings of my home group here in Houston. Mm-hmm. And he went and promptly got with a girl who had 18 months. They have been in and out, but now they're both sober today, and I wish them well. But on my end of it, I thought that this was time to fight. And I took all the alcoholic determination that I had, and I was going to win over them. I was going to be skinnier. I was going to keep the house. I was going to get a better car. I was going to do all the things. And let me tell you, I got all the things. And at the end of all that winning, I still had a little problem called alcoholism. And I won all the things, and both of them went back out. One was that one detox, one was that another detox. And I thought for sure I would find some peace of mind. This thing inside that was always wanting something, this thing about winning would make me feel better.
Did it want to drink, though? That's what I'd like to know.
It didn't want to drink, but it wanted me to commit suicide. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the ism.
I wondered about that because the way you're talking about it, you got the things that you thought that you needed that would make you whole, but yet you had this feeling of extremism and anger and all these other feelings about what had happened in your life. And it seems to me the next natural thing for an alcoholic to do is drink, if that triggers the desire to drink. What kept you from taking a drink at that time with all that going on inside?
I don't know, but my first sponsor said, you do your meditation every day, morning, night, you do your 11. Uh-huh. And then I was doing some other stuff I shouldn't have been doing. And she said, just keep praying. And I can say that I never stopped doing my 11-step prayer meditation, even when I felt guilty, even whenever I felt like God didn't approve of me.
Yeah.
I still went to meetings. I never got away from meetings. And so you said, did that thing want to drink? Mm-hmm. The alcoholism in me, the ism. It didn't want to drink, but it was a jumping off place. Yeah. I couldn't imagine life with or without the alcohol. I knew loneliness such as few do. I wish for the end. Mm-hmm. And those suicidal thoughts that were there before I ever went to jail the first time came back. And it was a real dark prayer, but it was a dark comfort. And it would say, she killed herself, she killed herself, she killed herself. And when that prayer came back, I hadn't even thought about that prayer. I didn't label it a prayer, but now when I'm thinking about it, it's not a prayer like to God. It is a prayer, but it's a dark thing. And if it was comforting, I would chant that to myself. And when I had 15 years sober and none of the external chasing and winning did the trick, that prayer came back. And I recognized it as alcoholism, the jumping off place. And I asked God for a little help, just real offhandedly. Yeah. Give me some help. I turned on the TV and they had this documentary and it said Melchizedek. And I said, these theologians, these doctorates, degrees, theology, they don't know. I know. I'm going to go read and prove them wrong. So God appealed to me through my intellectual arrogance, my intellectual pride. And this started me going to the Bible and start reading. It was my grandmother's Bible. I had a big resentment at her. I had to literally knock the dust off. But in starting to read, what was really happening here is I was letting go of my anger at her, and I was letting go of my prejudice and my anger at organized religion. It was a surrender. And right after that surrender was a hilltop. It started about a 2-month meditation and prayer. And I loved it. I read Genesis through twice. I wrote down all the years from Abraham to Noah, from Adam to Noah to Abraham. And there was just a lot in there. It's the Bible is kind of like the big book. And I'm not pushing any religion, but they're not ordinary books. You don't go to them and read them for scientific explanation. You go to them with a full heart and with a feeling so you can connect to something bigger than we are.
So you had a spiritual awakening, it sounds like, at that point, unlike any that you'd ever had.
Right.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so this whole dark prayer, the suicidal thoughts, it went away in one night. And then, but I was mad at the people in AA because they seemed like they were all together and I was by myself. I would look on Facebook and they'd have girls with 2 years sober and they were married, they had all these kids, them and the husband and the kids are all dressed alike. And I just felt back like I had when I was a newcomer, like the world and its people had rejected me and they were dominating me. So I was still kind of pissed off. I had some justified anger going on. What I found during that time is that I had prized my victimhood, the God of victimhood, over everything else. I had used that to power me through school and getting the jobs and becoming a good designer. And I found that I was angry at my father. During that 2 months, it was this whole struggle. What if I surrender this victimhood? What if I just let it go? But wait a minute, if I let that go, I won't have my edge. I won't be this hardcore. And I just thought I was hardcore. I really wasn't. Yeah. But in letting that go, it was such a big part of my identity. I felt like I was falling off a cliff. And then I just asked God, take this. And it was a real third step. And I didn't know it. I didn't label it as a third step, but I did ask God for help and to take it. And he did.
That is such a glorious story. I mean, that boils it down to the essence of AA, and that is we have a spiritual awakening at some point, maybe at many points along the way, but it never fails to change us in a big way, maybe in a small way, but it sounds like you were changed by that. So that's in year 15 that happens to you.
Right.
So we're talking about another 6 years?
Yeah, 6 years.
Okay. What was life like after that incredible experience?
After that, my sponsor told me to give the girls from a detox a ride to my home group. So I started going back to the home group. Then I got into chairing a meeting. Then I got a sponsee that stuck. And me and her were both the same type. I finally, a sponsee that stuck. We were trying to have something bigger than sex relations or chasing to win and all that. But we didn't trust each other very much. And but it was a beautiful thing that two damaged women would try. And I remember one year we had to get together. We brought the boyfriends over. We were both sleeping with one eye open. Let me tell you, we were watching each other. But we are still friends today. I sponsored her for now. She has almost 11 years sober. I'm not her sponsor now, but I wish we are still close. We talk all the time. I threw her a baby shower. But during that time, I had got to the AA history, and this part is about step 9, a real step 9, because I read about Frank Buckman, who had he was over a boys' home in the U.S., He had problems with the priest here, got resentful, went to Europe. While he was there, he went to an evangelist, and he had like a change of heart. He went
Mm-hmm.
home and wrote letters of apology to the other priests, the ones who had harmed him. That's what he called them, but they're really amends. I read that. The light bulb started flickering. Wait a minute. These people wronged him. He made amends to them. But it really didn't make sense. So then, about a year later, I had 16 years. I went to state convention. I went with another girl in AA. She paid for the room. I paid for the room. She paid for gas. The gas was $35. The room was like $180. We get back. She tells me she shouldn't have paid for the room because we took her car. So I was mad. I was pissed. I told her, you need to go talk to your sponsor. So I went and talked to my sponsor. And my sponsor said, if you really want my advice, here's what I think you should do. I think you should tell her, keep the money for the room. And if you owe her $35 for gas, you pay her. You go ahead and pay her. That was what you said you would do. I said, wait a minute. I got 16 years sober. I think I know what an amends is. I've heard of people not doing everything their sponsor says. I don't think I'm going to do this one. And I wasn't going to do it. Well, then that girl, she starts calling me. She said, well, I talked to my sponsor and I owe you the money. You want to meet up? And I said, no. And because I didn't want to have to let her keep the 90 and me pay the 35. I'm still trying to figure out whether or not I'm going to be this willing. So we're going to go to a meeting. We stop at Subway on the way there. But I got the cash out just in case I was willing enough. So we're sitting there. She takes out her 90. She puts it on the table. And I'm thinking, am I going to do this? And I got just enough willingness. And I said, no, girl, you keep that. I used the same words my sponsor told me to use. I said, you keep that, you pay it forward, take another girl to a convention, and here's your 35 for the gas. And as I was saying it, tears just came out. And I can't explain it any better than a weight was lifted off of me. Mm-hmm. I had to take the action to understand. It's not in the intellectualizing, it's in the doing. And I finally understood when they say, you don't understand now, you'll understand later. You take the action now, and later you'll have clarity. It was like all the stars and planets aligned, and I could see for a million miles. It didn't matter what she did. I was free. The world was beautiful. There was freedom in forgiveness. That forgiveness energy is the most powerful thing in the world. It's more powerful than alcoholism. It's more powerful than anger or winning or skinny. It's more powerful than any of that. It cuts right through all the anger, all the darkness. And that's when I understood 9.
That's amazing. Yeah, and that's a remarkable demonstration of the program in action and God doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves and the lessons that can be learned from that one experience alone. So between the time that you had that spiritual awakening and you were starting to demonstrate God's presence and working in your life, can you identify a few other times within your sobriety that took you right to the edge and you didn't drink, or other times in your sobriety where the triumph was so great that you might have decided maybe you could cut back? Can you speak to those two things a little bit?
I have had flashing thoughts to drink. It's never been the full-on thought to drink. I have been able to tell that alcoholism was returning. I had a normal boyfriend once, and I went to, he wanted to go to Ween's place. Then he wanted to go sit at the bar. And I thought, well, I guess I was kind of, I was wrapped up in this. But they say we have a good business, personal, or social reason for going before we go to these places. But I wasn't really prepared. And we ended up sitting at the bar. The energy was very seductive. Actually, it was very scary. I didn't like it. And so I left there and ran into a meeting. I was late, but I understood that I can't be in those situations. If I go to a place like that, I have to have a good reason for going, and that the only thing we have is a reprieve. Reprieve means stay of execution. We have a stay of a death sentence one day at a time through the reprieve of the 11th step. And so I've never gotten away from meetings. I know people that have, and I'm not judging them. I guess about the worst was after my ex-husband broke up and I was dating around. And I did end up at a club when I had 10 years sober. The night I turned 10 years sober, me and 2 of the girls, since then, they've both drank. And it was a hopping and jumping place. but I haven't really had a lot of that. Like I said, and I'm not taking credit for this. I'm really not, because God knows we have been granted a gift to the least deserving people, but it is by grace, not justice. Because if it was justice, I'd still be in a jailhouse.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think most of us alcoholics who've lived our lives with those temptations and things all around us recognize the importance of making sure that we're no more than a day away from our next meeting and no more than, let's say, a few hours away from having thought about the fact that we're an alcoholic and we can't drink. So it sounds to me like you stayed pretty well in the middle of the herd during those times. Speaking of some of the triumphs, one of the things I've noticed is that sometimes people have so much success that they start taking credit for it. And the minute they start taking credit for that, they start thinking that maybe they're running the show a little bit. And then things get better and they start to think, well, I did that pretty well. Let me run another show. And before they know it, they've run their show right out of business. Have you ever experienced that in your sobriety?
I'm glad you're saying that, because I do have a tendency to do that. And maybe I should give God more credit. It's just a hard, delicate balance. It's like I went to school, I graduated, literally, in my own experience, I graduated with a 4.0. And so it's hard to say I did these things well without giving the credit to God. On one hand, it's like God gave me these abilities. I am who I am for all the collective experiences that. One day I was in yoga. I do yoga like an alcoholic to blackout extreme. And I was landing every pose, but I'm still mad about my parents. I had the wrong parents. And then some thought came up, and it was like, if I hadn't had the parents I had, the childhood, all the experiences, maybe what is right now ain't so bad. But at the same time, the truth is, I know none of it would be possible without a higher power that could help us keep the insanity of alcohol away one day at a time. So if I'm sharing my story and it sounds like a lot of me, maybe it's just still my same old inferiority that wants a little credit, wants to prove I'm good enough. But I don't need to say it like that. I know in my heart, in my right mind, that it's God. And sometimes it feels too intimate.
I guess that's probably true. And when you start to think about the fact that if God is doing for us what we can't do for ourselves, then maybe the fact that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, maybe part of the human experience is feeling those egocentric feelings and starting to take credit for that which we really need to attribute to our higher power. But I think on the whole, if we're not doing that all the time and to too great of a degree, that can easily be written off to just the fact that we're human beings. We're going to suffer from all the foibles and difficulties that humans suffer from. But on the whole, we're pretty good people. And I think you're pretty good people. I've noticed that in the times that I've gotten to hear you speak in meetings. And that's why I was so happy whenever it was that you said that you would do the podcast. I'm sorry that the original version didn't work out, but I think this one is even better.
Well, and I want to say thank you, Howard. I think this is a great thing you're doing. You're taking your own time and your own resources to create a medium of communication for one alcoholic helping another. And I'm not trying to eulogize you, make you feel uncomfortable, but it does need to be said. This is a great thing you're doing. Thank you for including me.
Well, and the cool thing about it is that we won't know whose life it's touching and in what way. And the fact that somewhere amongst the thousands of people who are listening, there's going to be somebody who will identify with more than a few of the things that you've gone through. And I think it's absolutely amazing that you survived to get to sobriety, given what you went through. And I don't always say that because, sometimes people have difficult times and then things get better. You had one difficult time after another, after another, after another, and you still made it. So there's hope. There's real hope there. What's beautiful about it is you have a program and a spiritual connection to help you deal with that. I'm afraid that I would not get through some of the things that have happened to me had I not those things and my active participation in AA. And I see that for you as well. And I want to thank you so much for doing this today. I know it got to some emotions that maybe you hadn't counted on getting to, but to me, it means a lot, and it says to me that you trust me enough to become vulnerable in some of the things that you were saying, and I honor you for that. And I just want to say I love you, and I look forward to spending future meetings with you because you're a really terrific person, and I'm so glad we had this opportunity to get together.
Well, thank you too, Howard. I appreciate the opportunity and looking forward. Love you too, and looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Soleen. Take care, my dear.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Well, my friends, that's it for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, Soleen M., for sharing her story. And thank you for tuning in. If you have enjoyed the interviews in this podcast series, please share it with others. This show is yet another helping hand of AA we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. If you want to contact me directly with any comments, questions, or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. Please also take a minute to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA, that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.